Anchorage Tower, this is Orville Peabody in Air Force 67498. I'm over Kodiak at 20,000, descending and would very much like to land at your airport. Over. Oh, shucks, I guess I must have been tuned to the wrong frequency.
Not everyone has the communications difficulties that our friend Orville has. But there's an alarming number of pilots who aren't as familiar with their radios as they should be. Quite often, this lack of fundamental know-how is costly and time-consuming. A friend of mine has been flying for over 6 years and has logged a good deal of time. Yet, whenever he visits Los Angeles, he lands at an airport without a control tower, a good 25 miles from his destination. An inquiry as to why he does this always starts him on a rampage against tower operators, complex procedures, and possible collisions with some gigantic airliner. His basic problem is that he doesn't have the confidence and basic comprehension required to utilize the vast communication system provided him by the Federal Aviation Agency. Now, you can readily see that a firm understanding of radio communications and just a little practice will more than pay for itself in terms of safety, time, and money. Learning how to communicate with a control tower is a relatively easy chore and can be quite a lot of fun. Any aircraft having two-way radio may establish radio communications by calling the desired control tower. No particular code or procedures for such air-ground radio contacts are required on the part of the pilot. You should never hesitate to use the radio due to a lack of familiarity with radio telephone procedure. A message in your own words is always acceptable. Procedures, however, are desirable. There's one very good reason for this. Procedures allow more pilots to use a radio frequency in any given amount of time. Towers will always use standard radio telephone procedures to the greatest extent practicable without changing the meaning of the message. Most pilots also, as they gain experience in the use of two-way radio, pick up these standard phraseologies and add them to their radio vocabularies. Thus, the practice of phrasing information in a few standardized words or expressions is referred to as radio telephone procedure. Procedure is necessary because of the relatively few radio frequencies available for air-to-ground communications, and due to the large volume of traffic on these frequencies. But remember, procedures are suggested as a communications aid. Never hesitate to use the radio due to the lack of them or fear of using them incorrectly. The function of a control tower is divided up into 4 phases. 1, the control of arriving traffic. 2, the dispersal of departing aircraft. 3, the dissemination of various information as requested by the pilot. And 4, emergency assistance. Now, this record was produced with 2 purposes in mind: to teach you the vast services available from a control tower to any aircraft with a two-way radio, and secondly, to present the proper methods to be used in obtaining and utilizing these aids. The communications on this record were recorded in over 15 hours of flight time. These conversations were then edited and rearranged so as to present an educational aid providing you with the maximum amount of assistance in the acquisition of correct radio skills and habits. Let's start with the basic rudiments of tower communications and see how initial calls to a tower should be made. Turn the radio on and give it ample time to warm up. When ready to transmit, make sure no one else is talking. Hold the microphone close to your mouth. After giving thought to what you are going to say, depress the microphone button and speak clearly in a normal tone of voice. Don't forget to release the microphone button at the end of your transmission. Failure to do this will result in your not getting a reply to your call. You see, when you press the mic button, you are activating a relay which takes the electrical power in your receiver and transfers it to your transmitter. Releasing your mic button causes your receiver to become alive once more. When initiating a call, be sure to state the name of the tower you're calling, your full aircraft identification, and the frequency over which you expect a reply.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, 120.5, over.
Beechcraft 2364 Victor, this is Long Beach Tower.
Once the initial contact has been established, you may reduce your identification to only the last 3 digits. Since most conversations involve traffic control and handling, the control tower operator will need to know your position and your intentions.
Long Beach Tower, Beechcraft 64 Victor is at the northwest end of the field. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beach 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south-southeast 7, altimeter 299er2, time 05. Taxi via the east-west taxiway, hold short of the runway.
That was a typical ground clearance. The pilot was given instructions to taxi to the runway in use, which in this case was runway 16 left. The surface wind, altimeter setting, and time check were also given. When a pilot is departing from his own field, he knows where the various runways are and how to get to them. However, if you're departing a strange field, it's always a good idea to procure a copy of the airport taxi chart from one of the local operators. This chart pictorially shows the airport layout and the taxiways to use in getting from any point on the surface to any other. However, if you fail to get one, or if one is not available, all you have to do is ask the tower for more detailed taxi instructions.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor again. I'm not familiar with your airport. Would you please guide me to the active runway, over?
Beach 64 Victor, taxi eastbound from your present position, and I'll keep you advised.
64 Victor, roger.
At many highly congested airports, the tower is sometimes so engrossed with the management of airborne traffic that it has limited time to allot its attentions to ground traffic. When this occurs, the tower will be divided into 2 sections, one for the handling of airborne traffic and one for the control of ground traffic. Now, this latter section is referred to as ground control and should be used whenever ground instructions or assistance are needed. Aeronautical charts do not tell a pilot whether or not a particular airport has ground control. Before departing an unfamiliar field, it's a good idea to ask a local pilot whether or not the ground facility is available. However, if you're in your ship and ready to taxi, a quick call to the tower will readily determine the availability of ground control.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor at the northwest end of the field. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, Long Beach Tower. Contact ground control on 121.9er. Over.
121.9, roger.
The truth of the matter is, whenever any question arises pertinent to the safe and efficient operation of your aircraft, the control tower will always be available to solve your problem. Never hesitate in using your radio. It is the most vital source of information at your disposal. In communicating with ground control, the procedures to be used are identical to those in conversing with the tower. First, the initial contact, and then the message. Remember, ground control and the tower are one and the same. There just happens to be 2 controllers and 2 frequencies to help relieve the congestion.
Long Beach Ground Control, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, Long Beach Ground Control. Over.
Roger, 64 Victor is at the northwest end of the field. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beach 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south-southeast 7, altimeter 299er3, time 06. Taxi via the east-west taxiway, hold short of the runway. Over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, roger.
The ground controller told the pilot to hold short of the runway, meaning that he should maintain a distance of at least 100 feet from the active runway. Most large airports have a double yellow line painted on the taxiways just prior to a runway intersection. Pilots must never cross these lines unless cleared to do so by the tower. This prevents ground traffic from interfering with landing aircraft. Be certain to keep on the alert for these double lines, as they indicate you are approaching a runway. Along with giving you taxi instructions, ground control will also give you additional data concerning your safety on the airport. Be sure to always keep the volume on your radio at a high enough level to hear the controller. Many pilots become involved in hazardous situations that otherwise could have been avoided had they listened for warnings from the ground controller. Here's a few typical notices that we recorded.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, caution on the DC-3 taxiing toward you from your right, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, caution the men and equipment working ahead, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, caution the Navion to the right, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
When adverse weather conditions exist, and there is doubt as to whether or not you are aware of them, you might expect a call like this.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, flash advisory. Surface winds are forecast to be 30 knots, with gusts to 45 knots at Long Beach after 2300, over.
6-4 Victor, thank you.
Ground control should be monitored until you have completed your run-up. When you're ready for takeoff, switch over to the tower frequency.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, runway 16 left. Ready for takeoff, over.
Beach 6-4 Victor, cleared for takeoff.
So far, every time a transmission has been made to 6-4 Victor, the pilot has acknowledged the message. There are occasions when these acknowledgments are unnecessary and serve only to take up time. For example, if the tower clears you for takeoff and you are in plain sight of the controllers, they would be able to tell at a glance whether or not you heard them. However, if your takeoff is obscured to the tower by a building or some other obstacle, then it is necessary to let the operator know you've heard the clearance. Another time when no acknowledgement is necessary is when the tower gives you some information and then in the same breath begins talking to someone else.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, cleared for takeoff. Piper 6-5 Pop, continue downwind until further advised, over.
On the ground, a pilot taxis and makes his engine run up at relatively low power settings. Thus, the cockpit remains relatively quiet. You'll have no difficulty in hearing any transmissions made to you by the tower. Once you're airborne and are using a great deal of engine power, the noise level in the airplane will increase to the point that you won't hear any calls unless you turn up your volume control. Experienced pilots make it a habit to increase their volume just prior to takeoff, thereby eliminating the chance of missing an important call. Here's a transmission that pilots in slow aircraft will sometimes hear immediately after takeoff.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, veer 10 degrees to your left. Traffic is at DC-8 in position, ready for takeoff, over.
6-4 Victor.
As soon as 6-4 Victor veers to the left of the runway and the tower operator determines it is safe for the DC-8 to overtake the Bonanza, the large jet will be cleared for takeoff.
United 52, cleared for takeoff.
There is a standard departure to be used when takeoff has been accomplished. Take a look at the back of the Tower Communications album and notice the departure route for runway 16 left. Normal procedure calls for a pilot to climb straight ahead until he has passed the airport boundary and has gained an altitude of at least 600 feet above the ground. Then, a 90-degree climbing turn is made to the left. The pilot continues his climb on the crosswind leg of the traffic pattern for just a few seconds. After determining that he is not conflicting with inbound traffic, he makes a 45-degree turn to the right and departs the control zone in that direction. Whenever a left turn is to be made after takeoff, the runway is said to have a left traffic pattern. You'll notice that a right turn is to be made after taking off from runway 16 right. This means that runway 16 right has a right traffic pattern. Sometimes a pilot will take off from a strange airport and not know whether he is taking off from a runway with a right pattern or a left pattern. When such a doubt exists, a simple call to the tower will solve the problem.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beach 64 Victor. Does runway 16 left have a right or a left pattern? Over.
Beach 64 Victor, left pattern. Runway 16 left.
Departing from runway 16 left in a conventional manner is very convenient for those aircraft whose destination is toward the southeast. What if 64 Victor wanted to go to Los Angeles, which is located in exactly the opposite direction, toward the northwest? Well, there are some non-standard departures that are sometimes more convenient than the standard departure when you consider your intended direction of flight. There are 3 such non-standard departures. However, they can only be used when prior permission is obtained from the control tower. These departures are shown on the back of your album. There is the straight-out departure, which allows an aircraft to take off and continue his climb in the same direction until he has left the control zone. Then there is the right turnout, which allows you to make a right turn instead of a left turn after takeoff. Of course, if you were operating from runway 16 right, then a left turnout would be the type of departure you'd have to request. The last type of non-standard departure is the downwind departure. In this case, you would take off, turn left, and then make another left turn so as to fly parallel to the runway on the downwind leg of the pattern. It is important to remember, however, that you should always depart the traffic pattern in a normal manner, unless permission to do otherwise is obtained from the tower, either prior to or during your takeoff.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor, departing runway 16 left. Request a straight-out departure. Over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, straight out departure approved. Over.
64 Victor, roger. Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor. Request a right turnout. Over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, right turn approved.
64 Victor, roger.
The normal departure that we've discussed so far is to be used under clear weather or VFR conditions. That is, when the visibility is at least 3 miles and the cloud ceiling is at least 1,000 feet above the ground. Normally, when weather conditions do not meet these VFR minimums, only pilots with instrument ratings are allowed to depart radio-controlled airports. However, when only the visibility is reduced and there are no clouds preventing VFR flight, exceptions to the rule can be made, and pilots are allowed to operate within the control zone under what is called controlled VFR. For example, the Los Angeles area often experiences days when the skies are clear of clouds, yet the visibility is reduced to less than 3 miles because of a haze and smoke condition. Many other metropolitan areas also experience this same condition from time to time. This poor visibility layer extends from the ground to normally 1,500 feet above the airport. When on top of this condition, visibility is usually quite good, and the horizon is very pronounced. The only problem a pilot has is getting from the airport to VFR conditions above the haze and smoke, or VFR on top. Even though while climbing through this haze and smoke the horizon is obscured, a pilot will always see the ground by looking straight down. The tower cannot release control VFR traffic as rapidly as it can when clear weather prevails. The restricted visibility prevents the controller from actually seeing his traffic, and therefore he can only release one aircraft at a time. He must make sure that a departing aircraft is on top of the layer of haze and smoke before he can release another aircraft. This procedure maintains the sufficient traffic separation required. No other method would do. 2 pilots climbing through a heavy layer of haze and smoke are normally unable to see one another unless they're too close to one another to begin with. When controllers do release aircraft under controlled VFR conditions, aircraft are required to abide by special instructions. These clearances usually take the form of various types of climbing instructions. The following communications were recorded on a day when the sky at Long Beach was clear, but the visibility was reduced to 2 miles due to a haze and smoke condition. Listen to these climb instructions and use the airport diagram on the back of the Tower Communications album to determine the various departure routes described.
Long Beach Ground Control, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor at the terminal building. Request taxi instructions. Over.
Beechcraft 2364 Victor, Long Beach Ground Control. Your transmission was partly broken up. Say again.
Roger. Beechcraft 64 Victor is at the terminal building. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beach 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south 7, altimeter 3001, time 09, taxi northbound, hold short of the runway. Over.
64 Victor, roger.
So far, the pilot has had no indication from ground control that the weather is below VFR minimums. It is the pilot's direct responsibility to avail himself of the current weather at the airport. The tower personnel will always assume you are aware of the current airport weather. However, if you aren't quite sure whether or not it is VFR, a quick call will readily establish the existing conditions.
Long Beach Ground, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor again. What is your current visibility, over?
Beach 64 Victor, Long Beach weather clear, visibility 2 miles. Over.
Roger, 64 Victor. Can we get a controlled VFR departure, over?
Affirmative.
Thank you.
The pilot asked if he could get a controlled VFR departure because he knew that if he couldn't, he would have to have an instrument rating to legally take off. If the weather were reported as 200 feet overcast with a half-mile visibility due to fog, a controlled VFR departure would definitely not be approved. Instrument clearances and controlled VFR clearances can sound very similar. If you don't have an instrument rating, be certain you are not being given a clearance you cannot comply with.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, clearance ready to copy.
64 Victor, go ahead.
Beach 64 Victor, clear to on top after takeoff. Climb visual flight straight out to VFR conditions on top. If not on top at the shoreline, reverse course. Maintain at or below 2,000 and advise. Report in VFR conditions to the Long Beach Tower. Last tops reported 1,200 feet. Over.
Roger. I understand I am to climb straight ahead after takeoff, if not on top by the shoreline, to reverse course and continue climb to VFR conditions on top. Report reversing course at the shoreline and also upon reaching VFR on top.
Beach 64 Victor, clearance correct. Contact tower on 120.5 when ready for takeoff. Over.
64 Victor, roger. Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor, ready for takeoff. Runway 16 left, over.
Roger, 64 Victor. Hold position. Number 7 for departure.
Roger. Could you give me an estimated departure time, over?
Expect departure clearance in 20 minutes. Over.
64 Victor, roger.
When a clearance is received by a pilot, he is urged to repeat the clearance back to the controller. This not only lets the tower operators know that you understand the climb instructions, but it also gives you the peace of mind of knowing that you are fully aware of how to successfully complete your climb.